We're starting just a few minutes early, so I'm going to finish up my snack here. Just wanted to get everything rolling so that anybody that might be trying to tune in a little bit early will have a place to go. So probably while I get a little snack, get a little drink, we'll get started with the discussion in about 2 to 5 minutes, give or take. There, now you don't have to watch me. All right. It is 7 o'clock and time for us to get started. So I'm going to load up my Bible program and we'll get rolling. All right, so we're going to start in 1 Kings chapter 15. And we're going to go all the way to 2 Chronicles chapter 13. Let's get started here. So in 1 Chronicles 15, we start with Abijam's reign in Judah. And I've got a lot more notes for us in Kings than I do in Chronicles. A lot of that's just because Chronicles is a lot of son of such and such, he was the son of such and such kind of stuff. So not a lot of notes to take there. Kings kind of is the cliff notes, so to speak, for what happens. And then Chronicles is, in some ways, gets a little bit more explanatory and goes into more detail. But looking in 1 Kings chapter 15, starting in verse 3, talking about Abijam, and he walked in all the sins of his father that his father did before him, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, setting up his son after him, and establishing Jerusalem, because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and did not turn aside from anything that he commanded him in all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. It's important to note the faith of David here and how long it benefits his family, even going generations after him, several generations in this case. Because Abijam was the son of Jeroboam, who was the hold on. King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, rather. No, wait. Son of Solomon, yeah. So, being the son of Solomon, David's grandson, he has some benefits to that. In verse 11, and Asa did what was right in the sight, talking about the next king of Judah, Asa. Abijam was Rehoboam's son. I'll get this right here any minute now. So Abijam being Rehoboam's son, David's great-grandson. Right. Now Asa, in verse 11 of chapter 15, Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as David his father had done. He put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols of that his fathers had made. He also removed Maacah his mother from being queen mother, because she had made an abominable image for Asherah. And Asa cut down her image and burned it at the brook Kidron. But the high places were not taken away. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was wholly true to the Lord all his days. And he brought into the house of the Lord the sacred gifts of his father, and his own sacred gifts, silver and gold, in vessels. So we see here this legacy of faith of David prevailing on, which we would not see in the northern kingdom. Skipping ahead to chapter 16, verse 8. In the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, Elah the son of Baasha began to reign over Israel in Tirzah, and he reigned 2 years. But his servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, conspired against him when he was at Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, who was over the household of Tirzah. Zimri came in and struck him down and killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his place. We see here the results of one man's drunkenness ended up in some turmoil in the kingdom there, and it made for him to be very easy to be overthrown because he was very vulnerable. And so it's kind of a warning message there against drunkenness. In verse 29 of chapter 16, we see Ahab's reign begin. A lot of the books of Kings have to do with the reign of Ahab. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri began to reign over Israel, and Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. Ahab, obviously, if you've read the books of Kings, if you've read the Old Testament before, you know that Ahab is not a nice guy, and he's only really kind of shadowed. In terms of evil, he's only overshadowed by his wife, Jezebel. And even to this day, Jezebel is considered somewhat of an insult because she was not a good person. As a result of Ahab and his wickedness, Elijah predicts a drought, which happens, and we start to see the Elijah working in the kingdom here. Elijah raised the widow's son, and in chapter 18, verse 1, he actually ends up confronting Ahab. After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, so that would be the 3rd year of the drought, saying, "Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." So as a result of his meeting with Ahab, God would make it rain again, and the drought would end, which would be a blessing. So you'll recognize a lot of the names in the king, the books of Kings, as being books of the Bible, which is interesting. Obadiah being one of those names. Elijah sent Obadiah to Ahab. Obadiah objected more than a little bit, saying, "Look, Ahab's probably going to kill me if I go. Why would you send me? What are you doing to me?" Elijah assures him that won't happen, and of course it doesn't, just like he says. And then in verse 20 of chapter 18, so Ahab sent to all the people of Israel. This is after the challenge that Elijah issued. All the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel, and Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. Just a great image and words of wisdom there, to go limping between two different opinions. Serve one or the other, but you're never going to be able to serve both, is his message there. And we see that message echoed throughout the Bible. Choose who you're going to serve, because you're either crippling your service to God, or if you're going to, enjoy this other thing, then go enjoy it, because you're certainly not going to receive the benefits from serving God. So you might as well make the most of it. We tell them a lot of times get wrapped up and tossed torn between two things, and it really cripples us. And that's what Elijah the prophet's telling the nation here. Next, we see the tournament of sacrifices. So we have Elijah with his sacrifice and the prophets of Baal. And whichever one can be lit on fire from heaven is the one who is the real God. And Elijah started late, several hours later, at least 6 hours later than the prophets of Baal. He had poured water all over his altar. And no matter what the prophets for Baal did, nothing would light theirs on fire. But even though Elijah had done everything to make his not light on fire, whoosh, it is consumed in flame. So it's obvious who God really is. And then Elijah orders all the prophets of Baal seized and executed. And after that, the Lord sends rain. Jezebel hears about what happened to her beloved prophets and vows to collect the head of Elijah as a result of it. In chapter 19, verse 11, Elijah says, go out and, excuse me, who's speaking here? We'll start in verse 9. Therefore he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." This is God talking. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sounds of a low whisper. And Elijah heard it. He wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It's interesting to me that, we have all of these events that happen before the low whisper. And we call those things acts of God. But God was not in all those things. God was in the gentle peace that would come after all those things. We think about end times and people claiming, the world's going to end and catastrophe is coming and all these bad things are going to happen. Yeah, that's all true. Bad things will happen. But is God necessarily in all of those things? And I think the answer is, at least part of the answer is here. Those are not the things that God was in, even though they all happened. And were probably caused, at least in part, by God. But God was in the low whisper. God wasn't in the big catastrophic events. Moving on, we see Elisha called at the end of 19, and then even though Ahab was wicked, he would still be able to do things that one would not think, given his wickedness, because God would bless would bless him and allow him to conquer Ben-Hadad. At one point, Ahab even repents. In chapter 21, verse 25, there was none who sold himself to do what was evil in the sight of the Lord like Ahab, whom Jezebel his wife incited. He acted very abominably in going after idols, and the Amorites had done, whom the Lord cast out before the people. And when Ahab heard those words, he tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his flesh, and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went about dejectedly. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the disaster in his days. But in his son's days, I will bring the disaster upon his house. So even Ahab, being as wicked as he was, I mean, it's described there in verses 25 and 26. It's really just, the power of a repentant heart on our God. If he would accept Ahab in all of the wicked and evil things that Ahab did to God's chosen people and where he led them, it gives us hope for, outside of the sacrifice of Christ, it gives us that kind of hope that when we have a repentant heart, because of the sacrifice of Christ, God is faithful to forgive us of our sins. So then we really get to the end of 1 Kings there. There's obviously more to it, but once again, you're doing the reading. I'm just kind of highlighting the big things that I see that really kind of stand out to me. Anybody who joins us in discussions, you're more than welcome to contribute with what you see as well. We'd love to hear what you have. You can obviously comment at a later time. If you're not able to watch the live stream here, it's available for you anytime on YouTube to watch. So would encourage you to watch it at a different time if you're not able to participate live with us. In 2 Kings, we still see Elijah working. He denounces Ahaziah. And then in chapter 2, we see Elijah taken up to heaven, and Elisha takes over for him. Starting in verse 23 of chapter 2, he went up from there to Bethel. And while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered him, saying, "Go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head." And he turned around, and when he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. That's a common story. One other common Bible class story that, and yet it's only 2 verses in the Old Testament. It is an important lesson about respect and showing the proper respect for people that deserve it. Elisha certainly deserved it on multiple levels. Not only was he the elder of these wicked children, he was also the prophet of God, so deserved quite a bit of respect and was receiving none, and the boys in this case perished as a result of it. And then we see this Shunammite woman. The Shunammite woman will play a prominent role in the book of 2 Kings. We see her reappearing over and over again. She seems to have been a favorite rest spot of Elisha's. He would regularly stop at her place and rest there, so much so that they even built a special room for him. In chapter 4, verse 11 of 2 Kings, it says, "One day he came there, and he turned into the chamber and rested there. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, 'Call this Shunammite.' When he called her, she stood before him, and he said to him, 'Say now to her, see, you have taken all this trouble for us. What is to be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army?' She answered, 'I dwell among my own people.' And he said, 'What then is to be done for her?' Gehazi answered, 'Well, she has no son, and her husband is old.' He said, 'Call her.' And when he had called her, she stood in the doorway, and he said, 'At this season, about this time next year, you shall embrace a son.' And she said, 'No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your servant.' But the woman conceived, and she bore a son about that time the following spring, and Elisha said to her." So we see here that the word of God would be held as true. Oh, interesting. Well, Beandar, Benjamin, I'm getting a comment here that it won't let him join. I don't know why. He's been invited. Worst case scenario, you can watch along with us. But I did get your messages there on the Hangouts. Let's see if I can figure that out real quick. We do have a viewer. It's probably him, I imagine. Let's see. Plus. I just sent you a specific invite. So there you go. Now we see you in the broadcast here. I can't hear you though. That's probably because my volume's turned down. Let's turn that up. Let's try again. All right. Are you there? Yeah, you're there.
Hey, what's up?
Not much. So we've been progressing through. Thanks for joining us, by the way.
All right. Yeah.
We moved through First Kings already. The second half of First Kings there. We've on into Second Kings, chapter 4. I don't know how much you got to hear before you got to join the talk here.
No, I just came up here and I'm watching for like a couple minutes.
Okay, so started talking about the Shunammite woman.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting the role that non-Jewish people play in the Jewish kingdom. The Ruth being one of those, but in this case, the Shunammite woman who Gehazi evidently needs to at least liaise with. And she would be very prominent in Elisha's life, even being his place of refuge in times of need. So moving on in verse 38 through 42, we see that Elisha purifies the deadly stew. In verse 42, a man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, fresh ears of grain in his sack. And Elisha said, "Give to the men, that they may eat." But his servant said, "How can I set this before 100 men?" So he repeated, Give them to the men, that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left, according to the word of the Lord. We see here a miracle similar to what Christ did on 2 occasions with the fishes and the loaves. So it wasn't the first time in the nation of Israel's history that a man coming around and having an unexplainable amount of food for everybody that's before him. It's not when Jesus did it, it wasn't the first time. Israel would have known about it in their history from their reading of the book of Kings. Especially the Pharisees should have recognized this as somewhat of a sign because they would have held Elisha in high regard. But for whatever reason, that was not the case. Next, we have the story of Naaman. Naaman, of course, the very popular Bible class story. Naaman has leprosy, is commanded to dip in the Jordan. He doesn't think the Jordan is really all that clean of a river and would rather dip in the rivers of the Damascus 7 times. Does not work for him, so he dips in the river Jordan 7 times, and he's healed.
All right. I just got my Bible and everything set up just now. And so what chapter and everything?
We're on 2 Kings 5 now.
2 Kings 5. All right. Wow, I'm way behind. I'm still in Joshua.
Okay. You got a whole week to catch up now.
I'll do some extra reading.
It's like reading every day.
Well, you know what? I've actually thoroughly enjoyed it. I've just been going over it quite slowly and, not trying to rush through things. At first, I was skipping a lot of genealogy and commands. And then I'm like, well, you know what? This is the word of God. So I started going over it some more and, trying to understand and highlight things that were of note to me.
Yeah, I find the commands to be very interesting, going back to that. Not only because of my involvement in the medical field and looking at like the Jewish diet and the Jewish customs and how many of those things we mimic in some way, shape, or form today, but how that would have helped them avoid the spread of disease and make food preserve and last longer, and keep them healthier, because they're not eating the unclean foods that they would be not eating would not be making them sick like our foods do. People don't realize that a lot of illness that we have is because of the lack of real food that we eat, all processed foods. So anyhow, getting back to this week's, because we're pressing on. Gehazi is that servant of Elisha, and the one who tries to kind of take a profit off of what Naaman does, and it's not really all Gehazi. It's Naaman really is insistent that somebody be given a gift as a result of his curing. Elisha will accept no gift, so Gehazi accepts it instead. In verse 27, we see the punishment for that. Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. So he went out from his presence, a leper like snow. So Gehazi and his descendants would be punished because Gehazi took the gift. And I think Elisha, I mean, this is my opinion purely, but Elisha realized that it's not a gift for him to get. Well, I mean, let's see here, verse 20. That's not really a good example. The gift for Naaman came from God, not from Elisha. Elisha was just the delivery mechanism. And while Gehazi was happy to take the gift, Elisha certainly would not. So in chapter 6, we see the axe head recovered. Man loses an axe head. Elisha throws a stick in the water, and it magically floats to the top. Iron doesn't float, so that's quite miraculous. And then we see the horses and chariots of fire. Ben-Hadad siege of Samaria. Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, would then start to basically the king of Syria would besiege all of Samaria and end up taking just huge swaths of the Israelite kingdom that David had procured for them and Solomon had procured for them. And we really just see the whittling away of God's kingdom if you look at the maps of that day. In chapter 7, verse 1, but Elisha said, hear the word of the Lord, thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time, a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. If we look back at verse 24 of chapter 6, afterward, Ben-Hadad's king of Syria mustered his entire army and went up to besiege Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria as they besieged it. So they've cut off all flow to the city until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and the fourth part of a cab of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. So these people,
there you go.
Birds flying by and dropping stuff, and they're selling it to eat.
Ew.
Yeah, I mean, we think of that as gross, but the reality is that if you understand the biology of the bird digestive tract, it is edible. Doesn't mean you want to eat it. Of course, you don't want to eat a head of a donkey either. But at the same time, that's kind of establishes the value. A head of a donkey, is selling for 80 shekels. It's a lot of money. And then Elijah comes in and says, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time, a seah, that's about 7 liters of fine flour, shall be sold for a single shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel. So basically saying that the siege will be over and commerce will be able to be reestablished. And this is accomplished through 4 lepers in verse 3 of chapter 7. Now there were 4 men who were lepers at the entrance to the gate, and they said to one another, why are we sitting here until we die? If we say, let us enter the city, the famine is in our city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. So now come, let us go over to the camp of the Syrians. If they spare our lives, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall die. So they rose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. But when they came to the edge of the camp, the Syrians, behold, there was no one there, for the Lord had made the army of the Syrians hear the sound of chariots and of horses, the sound of the great army, so that they said to one another, behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come against us. So they fled away in the twilight and abandoned their tents and their horses and their donkeys, leaving the camp as it was, and fled for their lives. So when the lepers get there, looks like they have driven everybody out. Israel's still hesitant to go out and check things out because they say, well, it's just the Assyrians trying to draw us out of the city. But they eventually come out and commerce is restored. Next, we see the Shunammite woman, chapter 8, verse 1. So we see her again. Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, arise and depart with your household and sojourn wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and it will come upon the land for 7 years. So he warns his favorite Shunammite, says, get out of town because things are not going to be good here. She does. When she comes back, she wants her stuff restored. And that's what Elisha happens. That's what Elisha does for her. You can see that in verse 5. And while he was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life appealed to the king for her house and her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, here is the woman, and here is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the woman, she told him. So the king appointed an official for her, saying, restore all that was hers, together with all the produce of the fields, and all the day that from the day that she left the land until now. It's interesting because when you read that law, when you read Deuteronomy, you see this idea of the 7-year redemption, and that any debts every 7 years are to be forgiven and restored, the property restored to the owner. Very different way of doing things, a different economic system than what we experience in our culture, but nonetheless, that's what it was. And this would certainly have followed that principle.
Well, I'm going to switch computers right now because this one's kind of lagging and I'm having a hard time following along. So I'll be back in just a moment, okay?
Yeah, not a problem. We'll press on.
All right. I'll see you in a bit.
Next, we have Hazael murders Ben-Hadad. So Hazael was basically the servant of Ben-Hadad. And when he met with Elisha, Ben-Hadad basically sent him to Elisha to find out what's going to happen to him. Is he going to recover from his illness or not? And Elisha was not happy to see Hazael.
All right, hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. Now I can follow along.
Good, glad for that. So Hazael, the servant of Ben-Hadad, goes to Elisha, and Elisha tells him what's going to happen, that he is going to die. And Elisha's not happy to see Hazael either because he knows what misery Hazael is going to rain on the people of God. Next, we have Jehoram reigning in Judah, Ahaziah reigning. That happens in 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 7 through 15.
Yes, here we are.
And Hazael actually goes back to Syria and murders Ben-Hadad the next day. So he was right in that Ben-Hadad would not recover because he would be murdered by the person who was delivering the message.
Poor Ben.
Yeah, poor Ben-Hadad. So next we have Jehoram and Ahaziah. Jehu is an interesting king because of all that he does. If you look at chapter 9, verse 1, then Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, tie up your garments and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when you arrive, look there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, and go in and have him rise from among his fellows and lead him to an inner chamber. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and say, thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee. Do not linger. So this is where Jehu was anointed king. Now, if you remember the history of Israel, there's considered no good kings. Jehu is probably the closest to a good king that Israel will ever have. So in verse 14, he goes and he assassinates Joram and Ahaziah. Oops, my program collapsed. Hold on. All right, so in chapter 9, verses 14 through 27, he goes through and he basically removes the old bad kings from Israel, and also in verses 30 through the end of the chapter, go ahead and takes care of Jezebel as well. Comes in with his men, tells her servants, look, just toss her out the window. They do. They toss her out the window. They go upstairs and throw a big party because the queen is dead. And when they get back down to bury her, because she was the daughter of a king, there's just bones there because dogs had eaten all of her flesh, as had been prophesied.
Yeah.
It's interesting when we teach these stories in Bible class that we don't teach them. You would believe that the book of Kings is written in a different order than it's written in, because we tend to teach in an order that makes sense to us. So we teach about the reign of Ahab, and the reign of Ahab and Jezebel happens just kind of scattered throughout the book of 2 Kings. What I think we fail to promote whenever we do that is the idea that in Israel there was great dissension and divide, and there was no real king, because they always failed to recognize who their real king was, and that would be God. So they are always struggling with, well, who is the king? And such killed such and such, who's now the king, whose son killed them, and they went and killed all the sons of. So we see a lot of this in-house fighting, and it really makes for a very dysfunctional kingdom. Jehu would go through and strike down all the prophets of Baal. And in verse 28 of chapter 10, it reads, thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. This is another thing that you'll get when you read 2 Kings. The authors of 2 Kings really did not like Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Basically, every king is compared to did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. It's one of the most it's probably the most common phrase in the book of 2 Kings. And the second one is probably can it not be read in the books of the Chronicles of Judah or Kings of Israel? You can see that in verse 34. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did and all his might, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? That phrase just over and over and over again. But back to verse 28. Thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel, but Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin, that is, the golden calves that were in Bethel and in Dan. And the Lord.
My translation says, thus Jehu eradicated Baal out of Israel, and I find that interesting that eradicated.
Well, eradicated and wiped out, they're synonyms.
Yeah.
But that's the idea of what he did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I believe he went and rounded up all. Let's see. So if we start in verse 24, then they went and offered sacrifice. So yeah. So Jehu in 18 through 27 basically says, look, I want to have this great sacrifice for Baal, and every prophet of Baal needs to come out for this sacrifice. And if any of you are found to not be here, then we're going to kill you for not being here. So we think Baal is awesome, and we're going to make this great sacrifice to Baal. So he gets all the prophets rounded up, and then he kills them all. Yeah, he did wipe out Baal from Israel. He eradicated them. In verse 29, but Jehu did not turn. Okay, verse 30. And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in your carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel sin. So God makes him a promise, because he does faithfully execute what God wanted him to do in terms of a plan. But at the same time, he was not faithful in all things as he should have been. So still considered an evil king. Next we have Athaliah.
Now, remember, I haven't read any of this yet. I'm all the way back in Joshua, so I'm just kind of listening right now.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We're just hitting the highlights like we do every week. It's way too much to cover. And yeah, I mean, it's basically.
Do you want to have a hangout sometime where we go back in depth over things, where more people are at? I've been watching the discussions. I haven't really noticed many people in the discussions with you. It's just kind of reading them.
Yeah, so far that's what it's been. We certainly could. I'd have to designate some time for that.
All right.
But if you want to,
that'd be good. Where me and you could discuss things. Maybe a couple other people, who are having a hard time catching up, and maybe designate a whole day and invite some more people.
I would promote skipping ahead and then going back and reading what you've missed.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I would promote, because that keeps us on schedule, because we have the schedule published for everybody to follow, and that's kind of how it's broken up. So you could invite anybody to start today with reading day 36. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've been encouraging in the videos is, look, just pick it up where it's at. Reading from the Word of God is going to benefit you no matter where you pick it up, to wherever you put it down. So, we can certainly go back and look at other stuff. But for right now, I think we should progress on the schedule that we've.
I think so too.
So anyway, 2 Kings chapter 11, we have Athaliah, who's the mother of Ahaziah, was reigning in his place, and Joash is the king of Judah. There's really, this is one of the chapters I read through it and didn't find anything super noteworthy. And then chapter 12, verse 1, Jehoash was 7 years old when he began to reign. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba, and Jehoash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days, because Jehoiada, the priest, instructed him. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people continued to sacrifice and make offerings on the high places. So what we see Jehoash do is he goes in and he basically is advised by Jehoiada, and then repairs as much as he can, but is not able to really complete everything that he would like to, even though he reigns for 40 years. 40 years in Jerusalem. But it's interesting, verse 19. Now the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? So we see this once again reference to the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah or the Kings of Israel, as 2 Kings tends to do. It looks, as you read 2 Kings, you get the idea that this is the Cliff Notes version. This is the web presence that find out what this person did to cure their rabies, or click here, that kind of thing. So it gives you just enough information to get the point across, but it doesn't give you the full story. Next, we have Jehoahaz reigning in Israel, and then Jehoash after him reigning in Israel, and then the death of Elisha. And in verse 22 of chapter 13, now Hazael, king of Syria, oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion on them, and he turned toward them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them, nor has he cast them from his presence until now. When Hazael, king of Syria, died, Ben-Hadad, his son, became king in his place. Then Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, took again from Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities that he had taken from Jehoahaz, his father, in war. 3 times Joash defeated him and recovered the cities of Israel. So we see a little bit of Israel reclaiming their territory after Hazael is done with his oppressive reign. Next, we have Amaziah reigning in Judah. Amaziah would not be a good king, nor would Jeroboam II. Azariah reigns in Judah, also not a good king. Zechariah, same thing. Shalem reigns in Israel. Menahem reigns in Israel. Pekahiah reigns in Israel. Pekah reigns in Israel. These are just all the different kings that reigned. And it tells a little bit about what each of them did. Nothing really. And once again, at the end of almost every one of them, and all that he did, they never written in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. So it's really letting you know that, hey, these people, they were there. These are placeholders. If you want to see the real story, go check it out. Jotham reigns in Judah. Ahaz reigns in Judah. And I really don't have anything until chapter 17. It's interesting, for being the kingdom of God on earth that Israel was, it's only given a footnote whenever it's all done. Chapter 17, verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Hala on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. That's it. Israel's done. And then in verse 7, it talks about why. So 7:39. And this occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. And the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. They built for themselves high places in all their towns for watchtowers, from watchtowers to fortified city. So it'll go in to describe how sinful Israel was. Assyria ends up settling new people in Samaria.
So where in this description of I'm echoing on your mic, but where in the let's see, in this description, I'm in Judah right now. So when I'm going over this, where when it says why Israel fell, where does the book of Joshua? That's what I meant. Where is that in this?
Oh, Joshua's happening way before all this happens. Joshua happens before the book of Joshua happens before the Judges, before the period of the Judges. So you have the period of the Judges, and then Joshua is kind of the priest king. He's not really the king. He's the representative of God. That's the king of Israel at the time. And then after Joshua, you have the Judges, the period of the Judges, and then the period of the Judges kind of fades into, although there's still judges judging Israel during the reign of Saul, but then that fades into Saul, which is a unified kingdom under Saul in some ways, although he does have to be anointed multiple times. And then you have overlapping reigns of Saul and David. And then there's a consolidated reign of David where the descendants of Saul are sent into exile. And then you have the reign of Solomon, which is the only true united kingdom of Israel. But as soon as Solomon dies, the descendants of Saul come back in, and that's where the northern kingdom. So basically you have Israel, which is the northern kingdom, following the descendants of Saul, and you have Judah, the southern kingdom, following the descendants of David.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
In our Game of Thrones here for Israel edition. So yeah, that's how it all plays out. You really have two houses that are constantly vying for control that eventually just end up split permanently. In the house of Saul, who was never, he was the king that Israel wanted that God didn't, although God appointed him. Reigns the northern, and then the king that God likes, David, reigns the southern kingdom. Even to the point where David is allied with the Philistines, who he would, go on to, and we'll actually talk about that here in just a little bit in First Chronicles.
All right.
It's covered again in First Chronicles. But so we have the fall of Israel because of their idolatry. Let's see. The next thing of any kind of real note, chapter 19, as soon as King Hezekiah heard of it, King Hezekiah being a king of Judah, he tore his clothes and covered himself in sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. And he said to Eliakim, who was over the household of Shebna, the secretary, and the senior priest, covered it with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz. We see a lot of the prophets that were names in books of the Bible as we read through the Kings and the Chronicles. Hezekiah, there's another one. Hezekiah is the king, rather. So Isaiah prophesies about Sennacherib's fall, Hezekiah's illness and recovery, and then sends envoys to Babylon. And now we're having kind of what's the best way to say it? The kingdom of Judah starting to deteriorate, much like the kingdom of Israel did, up until we get to Josiah. So in chapter 22, Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedidah, the daughter of Adiah of Bozkath. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in all the ways of David his father, and he did not turn aside to the right or to the left. Josiah will be what is probably the greatest king of the southern kingdom. He repairs the temple. He finds the books of the law and restores them. He throws a big Passover feast. Chapter 23, verse 15. Moreover, the altar at Bethel, the high place erected by Jeroboam the son of Nebat, once again, the most hated guy in the book of 2 Kings, who made Israel sin. The altar with this high place he pulled down and burned, reducing it to dust. He also burned the Asherah. This is the only king that will actually remove the high places. In 21 through 26, he restores the Passover. And then we see his death in battle to the Egyptians. The end of the Egyptians, Pharaoh Necho killed him at Megiddo. Jehoahaz kind of is set up as oops, my program crashed again. Jehoahaz, yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm running a Windows 10 preview build, and I think it might be causing havoc. But anyway, all my technical issues aside, Jehoahaz ends up being kind of a puppet king under the Pharaoh Necho and ruling Judah, making sure that everything goes like it's supposed to. And then Babylon will come in. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, comes in and he wipes out Judah. If you look at chapter 24, verse 14, he carried away all Jerusalem and all the officials and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained except the poorest people in the land. So the only people that got left behind were pretty much the ones that were considered to be useless.
Oh.
Yeah, so that stinks for them, but they get to at least stay home.
I guess they're staying home there.
Perhaps, who knows? Anybody that didn't have a good use was left behind. And left to fend for themselves, mind you, too, because there wasn't any real, defense. All of the people who could be soldiers would have been taken away, so they were really left to fend for themselves. And that really ends you can read in chapter 25 about the captivity of Judah, and the rest of the kingdom falls. Gedaliah is made governor over Judah. Judah set up as kind of the vassal state at that point. And then at 27, Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, is released from prison and allowed to, given an allowance and kind of allowed to kind of rule over, just be he's more like a friend to the king of Babylon, someone that he can commiserate with, but he doesn't really seem like he have any power. Next, we move into First Chronicles. First Chronicles sets up genealogies, and these are interesting if we're trying to track lineages. So when we look at the genealogy of David, specifically, because that's one that's going to be a big deal, in chapter 2, let's see here. Where's the verse I'm looking for? Maybe I'm not going to find it. Israel. So it goes through the sons. Osman the sixth, David the seventh. Okay. Salmon, who fathered Boaz. Okay. Chapter 2, verse 11. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz has a famous wife because they book of the Bible is written about her. Ruth fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered Eliab, but David is one of the ones that he fathered. So Ruth, a Moabite, marries Boaz, who is the great-grandfather of King David. So it's interesting when you think about purity and the importance of purity to people in establishing lineages for ruling. We can see here that David's bloodline was not pure because he had Moabite blood in his bloodline, whereas Saul would have been considered a pure Benjaminite. So we really end up having this House of Judah versus House of Benjamin scenario in terms of who's going to rule over the kingdom. Which, when you look at it's not like Judah was the oldest son, because he wasn't oldest son of Israel. Reuben was. He was actually behind Levi, so he was the fourth. And Benjamin was the last son. But one of the most beloved sons of.
Well, obviously, most beloved.
Obviously, right. In my case, he is equally beloved to my second son, but oops, clicked on something. Okay. Next, we have the descendants of David. Once again, if you're establishing a lineage for kings, these descendants of each of these tribes is going to be very important because it's going to determine leadership for your tribes. Who's going to be the chief in your oops, it crashed again.
This is kind of a dumb question, but how big were a lot of these tribes?
In the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel at the time they entered the land of Canaan was probably in the 3-ish millions, 2 to 3 million people. So by this point, they should be, 4 million, 5 million in that ballpark.
Wow.
Next, we have the genealogy of Saul. So, what I mentioned earlier, you have these two dueling houses, one of Benjamin and one of Saul, and that's what chapter 8, verse 1 starts with. Benjamin fathered Bela, his firstborn, Ashbel a second, and it goes through all the way down to the Saul. Then we have the return of the exiles. My goodness, this program is not going to stay open. We have the return of the exiles in chapter 9, or the genealogy of the returned exiles, I should say. What's up, Benjamin? My family just got home, so there's probably going to be a little interruption here noise-wise. Saul's genealogy is repeated again, and then we have the death. We have kind of a retelling of what we already saw in 1st and 2nd Kings. So we have the death of Saul and his sons. David is anointed as king. David ends up having to conquer Jerusalem with his mighty men, and it talks about, if you really want to learn about David's mighty men, 1 Chronicles chapter 11 and 12.
12.
That's the place to learn about David and his mighty men. It's interesting, we look at David, and we read the verse earlier about, excuse me, how he was considered faithful in everything except Uriah the Hittite. But in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 1, when it comes to transporting the ark, David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds with every leader. And David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you and from the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who remain in all the lands of Israel, as well as the priests and Levites in the cities, and have pasture lands that they may be gathered to us. Then let us bring again the ark of our God to us, for we did not seek it in the days of Saul. All the assembly agreed to do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. Hold on one second. I'm going to eliminate some of this background noise here.
It's my background music.
Thank you. All right.
All right.
So we're back. I have sent the children upstairs. So we have the story of Uzzah in the ark. David and his wives. My goodness, this thing will not stay open now. David and his wives. It's my sign that it's been an hour and I need to wrap things up. We have the ark brought back to Jerusalem, the return of the ark to the tent, and David says this is no good. He's thankful that the ark has made it back in chapter 16, but he doesn't believe that it's really right for it to be dwelling in a tent while he has his house of cedar. So he says, I'm going to build a temple to house this great ark thing. And the Lord says, not so fast. You're too much blood on your hands. Your son will build the temple for me. We have the story of the Ammonites and how they disgrace David's men. So David goes in and defeats them, as well as the Syrians. This is really where, if you look at the history of Israel as a united kingdom, it just grows tremendously at this point. And then, once again, we get back to something else that David did wrong, but it wasn't considered as significant as what he did wrong with Uriah the Hittite. And that is the census. David's census brings pestilence on the land. So he goes to number the people without God's authority, and God says that's not a good idea. Pestilence. David gets everything ready for the temple, but Solomon's actually charged to build the temple in chapter 22. In chapter 23, like I said, I'm kind of glossing over First Chronicles because we've already read First and Second Kings. David organizes the Levites, as should have been done a long time ago, as well as the priests in chapter 24. In chapter 25, he's preparing everything for whenever it's time for his son to really take over and do all this stuff as it should be done. In chapter 26, he prepares the gatekeepers, division of the gatekeepers, treasurers, other officials, because there's going to have to be a lot of collection of resources. In chapter 27, we have the military divisions and the leaders of the tribes established. And then in chapter 28, oops, it crashed again. We have David's charge to Israel as he's ending out his life, and his charge to Solomon. 29, there's offerings of the temples. David prays in the assembly, and then in 29, Solomon's anointed as king, and David dies. Yeah, it happens. We all die one day. Next, we have Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles is going to look at the reign of Solomon, although
old age.
Yeah, he did live quite a long time. Solomon's reign is really covered more effectively in the Book of Kings, in my opinion. There's a lot more about Solomon's reign over there, but we can see Solomon's prayer for wisdom and that he's given wealth as a result of his prayer. We can see him preparing to build the temple. We see really the amassing of wealth here in chapter 4. You start to see the temple furnishings, and it's very extravagant. The estimated value of Solomon's wealth was so great that to this day, there is not a person who even has 1/100th the wealth as Solomon had. So, about the wealthiest man today, no one even comes close to, not even 1%, to what Solomon had. If we took the amount of gold, just gold alone, and put it in today's dollars that Solomon had in his possession. So, I mean, in terms of physical wealth, definitely the wealthiest kingdom to ever exist. Even including today's kingdoms like America. So,
wow.
No matter how great we think we were or we are, trust me, Israel had more money than us. They were paving streets out of silver because it was so abundant.
They didn't have debts to China.
Do what? Yeah, they didn't know China anything.
Oh, okay.
In Second Chronicles, yeah, I know. In Second Chronicles chapter 7, verse 1, This is the dedication of the temple. As soon as Solomon finished his prayer, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And the priests could not enter the house of the Lord, because the glory of the Lord filled the Lord's house. When all the people of Israel saw the fire come down and the glory of the Lord on the temple, they bowed down with their faces to the ground on the pavement and worshipped and gave thanks to the Lord, for saying, "For he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." It's interesting that you would have such a display like this, and it would only take them just a very short time to abandon all of it for Jeroboam, because that's what would happen next. So in chapter 7, verse 11, thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord and in the king's house. All Solomon had planned to do in the house of the Lord and in his own house, he successfully accomplished. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon in the night and said to him, "I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice." It's interesting. We don't emphasize prayer a lot whenever we read the Old Testament, but you see David constantly in prayer. You see Solomon doing the same thing. These wise men, men who are devoted to God, talk to God regularly. That's such an important thing that we need to pick up on whenever we read through these books, that the men of God aren't just doing their own thing all the time. They're constantly talking to God. In chapter 8, you have... Go ahead.
No, yeah, I'm just letting you know I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. In chapter 8, we have Solomon's accomplishments. So if you want to learn all about everything that Solomon did, chapter 8's it. The Queen of Sheba brings big gifts to Solomon, and his wealth is really described in chapter 9. In chapter 10, we see the death of, just before the chapter 10, we see Solomon's death. Chapter 9, verse 29. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, from the first to the last, are they not written in the history of Nathan the prophet and in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, in the vision of Iddo the seer concerning Jeroboam the son of Nebat? Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years, and Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. So we have Rehoboam, who, this is another popular Bible class story, goes and consults with the old men about what he should do, and goes and consults with the young men about what he should do as the new king. And instead of listening to the old wise men, he picks the young foolish men, and the kingdom revolts as a result of what he chose. So this would allow opportunity for the house of Saul, once again, to re-enter, and Jeroboam comes back in. In Egypt, in chapter 12, is actually able even to plunder some of the wealth of Jerusalem. And then chapter 13 finishes out our reading for today. We have Abijah reigning in Judah, which is also, interestingly, how we started in Kings there, with Abijah reigning in Judah. So we'll pick up next week. We will look at, let me pull it up here so that I get it right. For next week's reading, if you want to encourage anyone else to join us, we'll discuss 2 Chronicles chapter 14, and we will go all the way through the book of Job. So we're going to cover a lot of territory. We're going to finish out Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and all of Job. So,
there you go.
Yeah, actually, wait, 7 times 6 is 42. So we'll actually get all the way to Psalms chapter 8. So we'll even cover...
So I'm gonna skip from where am I now? I'm in Joshua 12, chapter 12. And I'm gonna skip all the way over to 2 Chronicles 14.
That's where we're starting
next week.
That's today's reading is 2 Chronicles 14:1 through 2 Chronicles 27:9.
Right.
So if you wanted to start today, fresh on our program, day number 36 is what day we're on. So next week we're going to discuss 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, and 42 on the schedule.
Okay.
So that's That's how we're going to read.
I'm going to have a lot of reading to do this week.
Good. Well, it'll be good for you.
Yay. So did you want to go over some of the stuff back in Joshua, or you're not
Sure.
up for that
If you have
right
any
now?
questions, I'd be happy to.
All right, well, let's go back to the book of Joshua.
If I can keep my if my Bible program will stay open.
So let's see, where did I leave off? So Moses dies, and now Joshua's in charge of things.
Yep.
All right, and I know I highlighted here where it says the Lord says, "Have I not commanded you?" in verse 9 of chapter 1, "Be strong and courageous, do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go."
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I found that encouraging, even in today's time. You know.
Oh yeah. That's something that we need to bear in mind. All the time. No matter what happens, one's on our side.
Yeah, and so here he is. He's in charge of an entire nation, and he there's surrounding armies and all this stuff, and all this all this death that's about to happen, and the Lord's just saying, be strong and courageous, do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And here we are in our small, considerably small lives. I mean, at least what I'm saying, like compared to that.
Yeah.
And nothing's too big for his shoulders to handle.
Yeah, and that's something to. I mean, considering you specifically, the volunteer work that you're getting into with firefighting, that requires strong and courageous, and trusting that you're making the right decision based upon your training in prayer that God's going to look over you.
This is true.
I'm sure it provides your mother at least a little bit of comfort.
Yes, it does.
Because no mother really wants to hear, "Hey, Mom, I want to run into fires for a living."
Yep. Especially for free for right now.
Yeah, and not get paid for it. But at the end of the day, we need those kind of people, just like Israel needed Joshua.
They did, and he is he like a general, to my understanding, because he seems much more war oriented than Moses. And the Lord says to him, what does he say? "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, cross over this Jordan, you all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the sons of Israel." Okay, that's not the one I was looking for, but God says to Joshua, follow after Moses. He's a good role model to you.
Well, in chapter 5, verse 13, when Joshua was by Jericho, this is the commander of the Lord's army, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." So when you look at the garments that Joshua was to wear, Joshua wore a crown. He wore a crown as a representative of God being their king and leading them through everything. So Joshua was never their king. He was their mouthpiece from God that would take them and allow them to conquer all of Canaan. And God would deliver all of it into his hands. They certainly did some conquering under Moses through the desert. They had to fend off the Amorites, I believe, and they had some people that would mess with them, and that they had to, didn't want them to pass through their land and that kind of stuff. But conquering a land to own, that was mostly Joshua that did all of that. So you think of the fall of Jericho, the fall of Ai, all the way, every other city that happens there. It's Joshua that's the one that's leading all of that charge until the kingdom is established, and that's where you come into the book of Judges. If you look in Joshua chapter 10, he defeats 5 Amorite kings, conquers all of South Canaan. In chapter 11, conquers all of North Canaan. in chapter 12, it goes over the kings. In chapter 12, it really kind of delineates for you which kings were defeated by Moses, which would be the kings east of the Jordan, and which kings were defeated by Joshua, which would be all the kings west of the Jordan. So you can look, if you were to look on a map, you could divide the Jordan River, and if it was basically east of the Jordan River, then Moses probably did the conquering, and if it was west of the Jordan River, then Joshua did the conquering. So, but even Joshua, say again.
I'm searching maps of Israel.
Yeah,
look at that.
Yeah. So in chapter 13, you'll find that even he wasn't able to capture all of the land.
Well, I'm in chapter 12 right now, so.
Yeah. So anyway, this thing keeps crashing. So what other questions do you have from Joshua?
Oh, well, let's see. No, not really questions. I guess the only question I had was, let's see. In chapter 5, verse 14, well, I'll start at 13. Now it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite of him, and a sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" He said,
Right.
"No, rather I indeed come now as as captain of the host of the Lord." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, "What has my Lord to say to his servant?" So who is this captain? How does that work? What is that?
Well, all we know is that it's the captain of the Lord's army. So a messenger from heaven who is a
ranking.
Well, a ranking officer in the army of heaven, who will lead the armies of Jericho, lead the armies of Israel into Jericho as they conquer the city. Jericho wasn't conquered by normal siege warfare. The walls fell apart as a result of a miracle. They marched around the city, blew their trumpets, and the walls came down.
Then I had, let's see. So in chapter 8, verse 3, so Joshua rose up with all the people to go to war up to, I don't know how you pronounce it, Ai?
Okay. Yeah.
And Joshua chose 30,000 men, valiant warriors, and sent them out at night. So, he's picking valiant, brave warriors. I mean, imagine these people are strong, some of their best men, and he sent them out at night. There's still so much tactic, so many plans and tactics and, strategy to all of this,
For Joshua at first, even Joshua had to learn that they weren't going to win based upon the tactical planning of the nation of Israel. They were going to win based upon God blessing them or not. And in the case of Ai, they were defeated. He would eventually end up taking anybody that was the weakest of the fighters and, taking that in, and they would conquer, So they had to get the sin out of their midst because of Achan. But it was something that they would be able to do because God was with them, because they had fulfilled what God had commanded.
Yeah. And then chapter 10, I thought it was pretty awesome. The battle there with the 5 kings and I know everyone thinks the Lord of the Rings or whatever, but so 5 kings,
This happened a little bit. This was written a little bit before the.
Yeah, a little bit before. But the sun stood still and the moon stopped. I just that's crazy awesome.
Yeah, I mean that shows God's power over the elements.
Large stones from heaven on them, so meteors or whatever that was, or
it could have easily been meteorites. We don't know. It's not. Doesn't say.
But you can definitely see that the Lord was fighting for them.
Yeah, they don't. Israel doesn't win. God didn't pick the mightiest of the races. When you read Chronicles talks about how David didn't just kill Goliath. David would later go on to kill Goliath's brother. And these were described as mighty men, giants with 6-fingered hands and feet. So, they're so exceptional that they had 24 appendages at the ends of their hands and feet.
There you go.
Yeah. So, and Second Chronicles is First Chronicles is very descriptive about that. But David would go on to conquer these things, not because David was some super duper warrior, but because he was the warrior of God.
Yeah, yeah.
How does David beat Goliath? Not through, putting on Saul's super duper awesome armor made just for the king to protect him in case of catastrophe. He does it with shepherd's clothing and a sling.
Yeah, it is amazing how you can see as I'm reading through the Old Testament how God works through all of this. How the miracles He's performing with this nation.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's all I have for right now.
All right. Well, it's been nice chatting with you and going over our reading for this week. Like I said before, just anybody that wants to join us, we'd love to have them. They can pick up on week 6. So day 42 is what we'll read through.
If we have somebody who is just totally doesn't read any of this, totally not unaware of any of the Bible, do we're just going to keep going over kind of like what we did, or are we going to take the opportunity to maybe talk about more important stuff or some of the deeper aspects,
That's such a loaded question. What's more important stuff? So, what our intention is to talk about what the Bible says. That's our goal every week. And we're trying to cover that over the course of 90 days, which is a very aggressive reading schedule. We certainly use the opportunity, just like we did tonight, to discuss specific things as the need arises. And by all means, I would never pass up the opportunity to talk to someone about the salvation.
That's what I meant by more important salvation and stuff.
Yeah. We're not to that point yet in terms of where we're at biblically, but
yeah,
it's something that is foreshadowed, and whenever we can see the foreshadowing of it, we'll point it out. It's something that we'll definitely end up talking about quite a bit, most in the next week, because of reading a little bit of Job, some of the stuff in Job, and reading, especially when we get into the Psalms, we'll probably do quite a bit of that. Looking at which Psalms are looking forward to something bigger. Same for Isaiah. I can't imagine us getting through Isaiah without talking about the Ethiopian eunuch, because that's how the Ethiopian eunuch was converted, was by reading the prophet Isaiah. So it's definitely something that we want to do. If there's someone that's present, we'd love to have them join our discussion. Of course, the comment section is always a possibility too. We can take comments. Not that we've had any, but we would certainly love any viewers to make comments and ask questions, because we'd be happy to answer those as they arise. But the ultimate goal is to just talk about what does the Bible say and focus on that week's reading. So let's do this discussion.
All right. Well, I'm gonna try to make it next week. I usually wind up volunteering on Thursdays and nights, so that's why I haven't been for like the past what is it, like 5 discussions?
Yeah,
terrible, Yeah. But I'm definitely gonna try to go next week and maybe bring a friend or so.
Super. We'd love to have anybody that wants to join us.
All right. Cool. It's been nice talking.
Likewise. We'll talk to you later, brother.
All right. See ya.